Climate change. In this lesson, we're going to explore the science and engineering practices of developing and using models, analyzing and interpreting data, using mathematics and computational thinking, engaging in an argument from evidence, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. Our cross-cutting concepts include patterns, cause and effect, systems and system models, and stability and change. So climate, what is it? Climate is not the same thing as weather. Weather is the state of the atmosphere at any given time and place. It is measured in terms of factors such as temperature, rainfall, humidity, and cloudiness. Climate is the average weather for a region over a long period of time. Typically, that is in the neighborhood of around 30 years. Weather can change several times a day. The climate normally takes a long period of time to change. So what would happen if the climate changed very quickly? What is climate change? The changing climate is a natural phenomenon and normally takes place over several centuries. The term climate change is used to refer to current changes in the climate. This is because recent scientific records show that the global climate is warming up more rapidly than it used to. The average global temperature has increased by 0.6 degrees Celsius over the last 140 years. The 10 hottest years for the last 100 years have occurred since 1990. Scientists have predicted that the climate could increase by up to 6 degrees Celsius in the next 150 years. Impacts of climate change. So what impacts might climate change have? We're going to look at a number of them. Nature, habitat destruction. Climate change could cause habitats to change faster than animals can adapt to them. Polar bears may be one of those species that could be at risk due to that. Wind, extreme weather. In 2005, New Orleans was hit by Hurricane Katrina. This is one of the most powerful hurricanes that has ever been recorded. Rising sea temperatures could mean hurricanes like this happen more often because we have more latent heat being released into the atmosphere from increased global ocean temperatures. Heat waves. In Europe, we had a heat wave in 2003 where over 20,000 people died. Although a milder climate might be pleasant, heat waves could be a real problem if temperatures were to increase. Food, changes to farming. Warmer weather has already increased the length of growing seasons in some areas of our planet. However, tropical areas could suffer from more droughts and famines because of those. Pests, increased disease. Hotter temperatures could encourage the spread of diseases like malaria. Mosquitoes, these are the insects that carry malaria, will be able to travel outside of areas where they predominantly live throughout the year. They'll be able to spread into newer environments, either northward from the equator or southward from the equator as temperatures increase. Thinking where we live, typically mosquitoes disappear around the end of October because we start getting colder temperatures and frosts that kill them. Coral, destruction of coral reefs. A change in water temperature by 1 or 2 degrees Celsius would be enough to destroy coral reef ecosystems. Australia's Great Barrier Reef could lose 90% of its species. And of course, sports, a decline in winter sports. If we have decreasing snowfall in regions where typically we've had high snowfall, it can affect things like skiing, snowboarding, maybe snowmobiling, and other outdoor recreation that might take place in the snow. Some resorts have had less snow cover on the slopes and have needed to close for the summer sooner. So what is global warming? The term global warming is often used in connection with climate change. But what does it mean? Global warming refers to the increase in the Earth's temperature due to the greenhouse effect, which can cause changes in climate. However, the term global warming is now being used to refer to the warming predicted to occur as a result of increased emissions of greenhouse gases and other human activities. This enhanced greenhouse effect may lead to significant climate change. Remember, global warming and climate change are not the same thing and should not be used interchangeably. Evidence for climate change, as well as temperature change, other evidence for climate change has also been collected. Changes in the organization of ecosystems, increase in ocean temperatures, retreating glaciers, a decrease in the amount of Arctic sea ice, and a rise in sea levels of around 17 centimeters. So how is this evidence collected? Different techniques are used to collect evidence for climate change. Weather recordings using thermometers, measure small changes in temperature from trapped air and other molecules using ice core extractions. Plant analysis, changes in climate can alter plant distribution in an ecosystem. Rocks and fossils, to measure the Earth's previous climate. And studying images of glaciers, as well as measuring ice cover. So what is the evidence for climate change? Data collected by climate scientists can be used to answer two key questions. Is the climate really changing, and is it doing so rapidly? And is human activity causing this climate change? These scientists are setting up an automatic weather station on the Dankuit Glacier in Russia. Monitoring glaciers has produced startling evidence about the rate at which some glaciers are melting. So looking at this particular glacier, it is in the Caracas Mountains between Georgia and Russia. The mass of the glacier has been recorded since 1964. This is one of the longest records for recording and is therefore considered a reference glacier. So why is carbon dioxide so important? Carbon dioxide is considered the most significant greenhouse gas. This is because carbon dioxide can remain in the environment over a long time, from 50 to 200 years. Any process producing carbon dioxide today could affect the climate for hundreds of years. Carbon is present in all living things and moves through the environment in a chain of reactions called the carbon cycle. Levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have increased since the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. So how might human activities have contributed to this? How are carbon dioxide levels measured? Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are measured around the world to detect global trends in the greenhouse gases. The standard measurement used is parts per million. In 2005, levels were around 370 parts per million. This means for every million parts of air, 370 of those parts were carbon dioxide. Research stations for monitoring atmospheric gases are usually sited in remote locations. The Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii is located at an altitude of 4,170 meters. Talk about remote. Climate change and human activity. An increase in the amount of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere has been seen over the last 200 years. This coincides with the start of the Industrial Revolution, when fossil fuels started to be used on a large scale. The burning of fossil fuels has resulted in large amounts of carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere. This has overlapped with an increase in global temperatures. Normally, a steady level of carbon dioxide is maintained in the air by the carbon cycle. So what affects greenhouse gas levels? Greater use of fossil fuels is thought to be the main source of the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide. Burning wood also releases carbon dioxide, as living trees are made up of carbon. Living trees also have a major impact on the atmosphere as they produce oxygen and absorb the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide. Deforestation reduces the amount of photosynthesis taking place, so increases in carbon dioxide levels are an outcome of deforestation. Rice farming and cattle farming produce the greenhouse gas methane. Methane is 7.5 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but is currently in the atmosphere at much lower levels. Fossil fuels are carbon-based materials that formed over millions of years from the remains of ancient plants and animals. Fossil fuels and oxygen are burned to produce carbon dioxide and water. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are measured around the world to detect global trends in this greenhouse gas. The standard measurement used is parts per million. In 2010, levels were around 390 parts per million. This means for every million parts of air, 390 parts were carbon dioxide. The proportion of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere varies due to human activities. So here's a graph from 1960 to about 2010, showing the gradual increase in carbon dioxide levels since that time. Carbon dioxide levels have risen annually. Within each year, there are seasonal changes in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Dips in carbon dioxide levels correspond to spring and summer months when plants are growing and photosynthesizing more rapidly. Ice cores, what are they? Ice cores are long columns of ice that are drilled out of glaciers. Ice cores are studied to increase understanding of the history of climate as they provide data about the distant past. Air bubbles trapped in the ice are used to estimate carbon dioxide levels thousands of years ago. This is called a proxy record. They are an indirect climate measurement, and they've been recorded using instruments, these are indirect climate measures that have not been recorded using instruments. Tree rings are another type of proxy record. So how have carbon dioxide levels changed over thousands of years? Over here we've got the present. Working backwards on this graph, we go thousands of years in the past. So if we're observing CO2 concentrations based on proxy records, we see something like this. So we start noticing somewhere in the neighborhood of around 10,000 years ago, a pretty drastic increase in carbon dioxide. And so the question is, are we having annual changes that are taking place due to natural fluctuations, or is this human-induced? So how have CO2 levels changed? These graphs show how carbon dioxide concentrations have changed over time. Around 200 years ago, CO2 levels were about 280 parts per million and are now about 380 parts per million. According to records, this is about 27% more than any other time in the last 400,000 years. So how might this affect climate? How has temperature changed compared to the 1961 to 1990 average? So we see starting here, 1961 to 1990 average. Prior to that time, data looked a little bit different. The global average temperature has increased at the same time as the levels of carbon dioxide have risen. However, it is not correct to say that carbon dioxide levels have caused this temperature change because there are other factors that are involved. So how should the data be discussed? Are temperature and CO2 related? Does the data show that increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide cause an increase in Earth's temperature? The data shows that there is a correlation between increasing carbon dioxide levels and temperature. However, it cannot tell us that one causes the other. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which means that it can trap the sun's radiation. This is a causal mechanism for carbon dioxide to increase Earth's temperature. However, we cannot say for certain that this is the only reason behind the temperature increase, as other factors may be involved. So how should I talk about the climate data? It is important to be very careful about the words used to discuss scientific data. Collected data shows that temperature and carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have increased at the same time. It might seem to make sense to say that the rise in carbon dioxide is causing the temperature rise, but this is incorrect. How do you know that it is not the temperature increase that is causing carbon dioxide levels to rise? And can you say for certain that carbon dioxide is the only factor in the change of temperature? It is more correct to say that there appears to be a positive relationship between carbon dioxide levels and temperature. Peer review. Research in science produces vast amounts of data. Sometimes that data is conflicting. So how do you know which research is to be believed? Peer review involves the independent evaluation of scientific research by experts in the field. They decide which results are published in science journals. A recent study of peer-reviewed research showed that 97% of climate scientists agree that human activities have led to climate change. Communicating climate change. It is important for data to be presented in an accurate and accessible way for both scientists and the public. Misrepresentation of data can lead to inaccurate opinions presented in the media that are only based on part of the evidence. This information may be biased to suit an individual's needs. Think about where you hear about current information on climate change. How is it portrayed, and what impact may this have on a person? Effects of climate change. The changing climate and increasing greenhouse gas emissions affect not just the environment, but also human lifestyles. The main effects of global climate change include extreme weather, disrupted agriculture, decreasing ice cover, changing sea level, and spreading disease. How do we predict climate change? Climate models are used to predict how Earth's climate is changing. These are computer models which represent the interactions between the Earth's atmosphere, land surface, oceans, and the sun. This results in a huge amount of information which makes it difficult to accurately model Earth's climate. We therefore use multiple simplified models to understand changes in climate. Modeling the climate. Using climate models, climate change scientists take several steps to make predictions about Earth's climate. Data from previous climates is entered into the model to test its ability to reproduce known climates. Scientists report a range of projections. For example, these can show how the climate might change if CO2 production stays the same, if it decreases, or if it increases. The International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, is a UN organization responsible for assessing climate change data. They use information from different computer models and research to write reports about climate change. So how is climate change predicted? Scientists use experiments to explore how things work and to test predictions. However, the climate is far too large and too complicated to be reproduced in a laboratory. Instead, computer models are used to represent the climate and explore the possible effects of human actions. Mathematical formulae are used to represent the separate parts of the climate system and how they interact. In models, the Earth is divided into grid squares using smaller squares, which increases the detail. So how is the climate modeled? There are many factors that can affect the climate. All of these interactions need to be included in climate models. Things like radiation from the sun and radiation from the Earth should be accounted for, along with precipitation, ice in the sea, the effects of seas and oceans, the effects of land, as well as rivers and streams and volcanoes and other variables that we don't have controls over. How accurate are climate models? Within a small section of the scientific community, there are still some people that are skeptics about the accuracy of the predictions produced using climate models. This is important to science. Arguments against using climate models include climate models do not measure local variability very well. It is difficult to model aspects of the climate like clouds. Cloud cover greatly influences surface temperature, and not including clouds in models could reduce their accuracy. And to predict the contribution of humans to climate change, the models have to make assumptions about population and economic growth. This could cause prediction errors. So how are climate researchers trying to solve these things? How are climate models tested? Climate change researchers take several steps to make model predictions more reliable. Data from previous climates is entered into the model. This tests the ability of the model to reproduce known climates. Scientists usually report a range of projections or scenarios. These can show, for example, how the climate might change if human carbon dioxide production stays the same, if it decreases, or if it increases. The International Panel on Climate Change is that UN organization that is responsible for assessing climate change data. They use information from different computer models to write reports for governments about the science of climate change.